The soft hum of the air conditioning was the only sound that broke the heavy silence as I stood in the back of the church. Mourners had begun to filter in, their faces etched with grief, though I could hardly register their presence. My mind was preoccupied with the one person I hadn't expected to see today. I hadn't seen Robert in years, and I certainly didn't think I'd see him at my mother's funeral. But there he was, standing tall and proud, the way he always did. He was dressed in his usual black suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his sharp eyes scanning the room. A quiet reverence settled over him, as if he belonged here, as if nothing had ever happened between us. I couldn't breathe. I could feel the walls closing in, the ground beneath me threatening to give way. It was like a time bomb had gone off in my chest, rattling the fragile peace I had so carefully constructed over the years. It had been over a decade since I last laid eyes on him. The last time was at my mother's hospital bed, where his presence had been nothing short of a mockery. The same man who had once occupied such an intimate, secret place in my life, a man who was never supposed to be more than a father figure, was now standing in front of me, attending the funeral of the woman he had betrayed, just as he had betrayed me. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady myself. The air in the church felt thick, almost suffocating, as memories of the past began to claw their way to the surface. I thought I had buried them deep enough. I thought I had moved on, that I had sealed off the parts of my life that had been irrevocably tainted by him. But here he was, dragging everything back to the surface with his mere presence. I felt the old anger stir in me, the rage that I had buried so carefully over the years, the rage that I never let myself express, not fully. But today, something was different. The facade I had so carefully constructed was crumbling under the weight of the moment. I forced myself to focus on my breath, steady and even. This wasn't the time for emotions. I had a job to do. I had responsibilities to uphold, and I wasn't going to let him disrupt the one thing I could still control. I glanced around, noticing that Robert had yet to spot me. My mother had passed away just a week ago, and I had been the one to handle the arrangements. Her funeral was supposed to be a moment of peace, a time for closure. But now, with him standing here, everything felt like an unfinished story, an unresolved chapter of my life. I took a deep breath and straightened my back. I would not let him see me crumble. Not today. I would do what I had always done, keep my composure, keep my anger in check. But this time, things would be different. I was ready to confront the past, ready to face the man who had once been everything and nothing to me. I was ready to take back control. I stepped forward, my heels clicking sharply against the church's stone floor. I had no idea what the next steps would be, but I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. As I sat in the church pew, watching the mourners whisper among themselves, I couldn't help but reflect on the years that had passed since I last saw Robert. I hadn't expected to feel anything when I saw him today. My heart had been prepared for the emptiness that often accompanies grief, for the calm of finality. But instead, I felt a wave of nausea, like a shadow had crept up behind me and was whispering all the things I'd spent so long trying to ignore. I had spent years trying to bury the past, and in many ways, I had succeeded. I had built a life that allowed me to forget, or at least pretend that I had forgotten. A successful career as a lawyer, a reputation for being cool under pressure, a life that no one would suspect had been tainted by the things I kept locked inside. But seeing him now, the man who had once controlled my life in the most intimate, painful ways, brought everything rushing back. The affair had started when I was still young, barely out of my teens, and yet in a way, it felt like it had always been there. Robert was not like other stepfathers. He was charming, charismatic, and always there when I needed someone to talk to. My mother was often busy, working long hours or preoccupied with her own struggles. And Robert? He was present. He listened. He was there in ways she never could be. At first, it was small things. Compliments, glances that lingered just a little too long, a touch of his hand brushing against mine as we moved through the house together. But over time, the boundaries blurred. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, like a secret we shared, like something that was just between the two of us. I never questioned it at first. It felt special, like he saw me in a way no one else did. I thought it was just the closeness that came with time, the natural progression of a father-daughter relationship. But as I got older, I began to realize it wasn't just fatherly concern. It was something more, something that shouldn't have been there. And then, one night, it happened. A quiet moment alone in the living room, the air thick with unspoken tension. He sat down beside me on the couch, close enough for me to feel the warmth of his body, and suddenly everything felt too much. His hand brushed against mine, and I froze. I could feel the pull between us, the undeniable connection that had been building for so long. And in that moment, I didn't pull away. I didn't resist. It started with one kiss, one small gesture that seemed innocent enough at the time. But I knew, even as it happened, that it wasn't. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't stop it. And that was the beginning of everything. What followed were years of confusion, guilt, and secrecy. It was never spoken about directly, never acknowledged, but it was there, lurking in the spaces between us. Robert became my confidant, the person I went to when I had questions, when I was uncertain. And he seemed to revel in it, in the power he held over me. But it wasn't just about the affair. It was everything that came with it. The manipulation, the control, the way he made me feel like I was the only one who truly understood him, who saw him as more than just a man with power over me. He played on my vulnerabilities, my need for approval, my fear of rejection. He made me feel like I was special, like I was chosen. As I grew older, I began to see the cracks in the facade, the way he would use his charm to manipulate people, to get what he wanted. He was always one step ahead, always in control. And yet, I had never realized how much he had controlled me, how much he had twisted my perception of what love and affection were supposed to be. The guilt gnawed at me, but I pushed it aside. I buried it deep inside, convincing myself that it was a mistake, that I had been too young to understand. But as the years passed, the weight of it became unbearable. I couldn't keep pretending that it hadn't happened. I couldn't keep pretending that it hadn't affected me in ways I couldn't even put into words. And then, a few years ago, I started to dig. It wasn't something I planned. It wasn't something I set out to do. But once the thought crossed my mind, I couldn't shake it. I started looking through old letters, old photos, anything that might give me a glimpse of the truth. I found old messages, tucked away in the back of a drawer. They were between Robert and me, exchanges that had once felt so innocent, so natural. But now, looking at them through the lens of time, they were chilling. The words I had once thought were loving and sweet now felt like a carefully constructed web of manipulation. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to acknowledge what I had been a part of. But there was no denying the truth anymore. Robert had used me, manipulated me, and then discarded me when it no longer suited him. The realization was like a cold slap to the face. I felt sick to my stomach. But beneath the nausea, beneath the guilt, was something else, something I hadn't expected. It was a quiet fury, a simmering anger that had been building for years. And it wasn't the kind of anger that made me want to lash out. No, it was different. It was a calculated anger, a desire to take control of my life again. I had been his pawn for so long, but I was done being a victim. I wasn't going to let him get away with it anymore. I was going to expose him for what he truly was, and I was going to do it in a way that he couldn't deny. I would use everything I had learned over the years, my legal expertise, my ability to stay calm under pressure, and I would make sure that the truth came to light. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting back at him. It was about justice, and I was going to make sure I got it. The plan took shape slowly, methodically. I couldn't afford to rush. Robert had always been good at keeping his secrets, hiding his tracks. I would have to be just as good, and better. This wasn't a hasty act of revenge. It was a calculated move to reclaim control, to expose the truth in a way that no one, not even Robert, could deny. I began where I knew best, with the law. It was a quiet Saturday morning when I made my first move, sitting at my desk in my home office, the sunlight creeping through the blinds. I had always been meticulous in my work, but now the familiar routine felt different. I wasn't just handling cases for clients. I was handling my own. I pulled up my old files, the ones I had kept from years ago, the ones that hadn't been touched since Robert and I stopped speaking. I opened the folder titled Estate Documents, and there they were, buried beneath the legal jargon, the letters, and the forms, the papers that could prove everything. There were records of money transfers, notes on investments, and, most damning of all, a series of financial arrangements I hadn't understood at the time. Robert had always been the one to manage the family finances, a role that seemed perfectly natural at the time. But looking at the numbers now, I saw a pattern, a trail that connected him to the financial manipulations he had made in my life. These weren't simple transactions. These were manipulations designed to tie me to him, to make sure I would never truly break free. I took a deep breath, pushing the unease down. I had come too far to back out now. I began to methodically go through the financial documents, cross-referencing them with old bank statements, contracts, and anything else I could find. I made notes in the margins, highlighting inconsistencies, odd dates, and figures that didn't match up. The more I dug, the clearer it became. Robert had used money, his control of it, to manipulate me. I had always believed his promises, trusted him when he said he was just looking out for me. But now I saw it for what it was, a well-crafted scheme to control every aspect of my life. But it wasn't just about the finances. No, this went deeper than that. I began searching for anything that might connect Robert to others, anyone else who had fallen victim to his manipulations. I contacted former colleagues of my mother, people who had known him before I had even come into the picture. I spoke to old friends of mine, people who had seen Robert and me interact, people who had seen the subtle ways he exerted control over me. It was slow, and sometimes painful, to revisit those old relationships, but I needed their accounts. I needed their voices to back up my truth. I reached out to one woman, Jessica, who had been close to my mother back in the early days of Robert's marriage to her. She was hesitant at first, reluctant to get involved, but after some gentle persuasion, she agreed to meet. We sat in a small cafe, the noise of the city swirling around us as I handed her a file with a few photos and documents. She looked at me over the rim of her coffee cup, her face pained. I knew something wasn't right with him, she said quietly, but no one ever spoke up. No one ever had the courage to. He was charming, manipulative, always knew what to say. And your mom. She was so in love with him, so blinded by it. Her words were like a slap to my face. I had always blamed myself for what had happened, for allowing Robert into my life in the way I had. But now, seeing it through someone else's eyes, I understood. I wasn't alone. There were others who saw the truth too, and it was time for that truth to come out. I spent the next few weeks gathering more evidence, reaching out to others who might have witnessed Robert's behavior or who could corroborate my story. Each piece added weight to my case. I could feel the tension building, the pieces of the puzzle fitting together. It was no longer just my word against his. It was the truth, and the truth had a power all its own. But it wasn't just about the legal case. I needed more. I needed to ensure that Robert couldn't hide behind his usual charm, couldn't talk his way out of this. So, I started to think beyond the courtroom. I contacted an investigative journalist, someone I knew from my early days as a lawyer, someone who specialized in uncovering stories of financial corruption and manipulation. After a few phone calls, we agreed to meet. He was skeptical at first, but when I showed him the documents I had gathered, his interest peaked. "This is big," he said, looking through the papers I'd brought. "If we can prove this, if we can get the right witnesses," he trailed off, already imagining the headlines. "We'll expose him." I had no intention of rushing to the media, but I knew that having this option in my back pocket could force Robert's hand. His reputation, built on his charm and carefully cultivated image, was fragile. If I could expose his lies, if I could show the world what he truly was, then the fight would be over. I wasn't interested in vengeance. I was interested in justice. With the evidence mounting, I started to prepare for the final confrontation. I needed to know my next steps, needed to be ready for whatever Robert would throw at me. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. This had to be done with precision, with accuracy, and with the knowledge that I had control. The day of the confrontation arrived sooner than I expected. I had prepared for weeks, meticulously gathering evidence, contacting witnesses, and planning my every move. But as I sat in the dimly lit conference room, waiting for Robert to arrive, the weight of everything suddenly hit me. My heart raced, not with fear, but with the steady, controlled anticipation of the moment that had been building for years. I had chosen the setting carefully, a neutral place, a professional space where there was no room for games. I knew Robert would come. He always did when there was something at stake, something to be gained. He had no idea what was coming. I took a deep breath, glancing at the clock on the wall. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one seeming longer than the last. I had been preparing for this moment for so long that it felt surreal. And yet, deep inside, I felt nothing but certainty. This was the moment I had been working toward, the moment I would reclaim everything I had lost. The door opened with a soft click, and Robert stepped in, his posture as confident and smooth as ever. He looked the same sharp suit, the same calculating eyes. He smiled when he saw me, that same smile that had always been so disarming, so false. "Alice," he said, his voice warm, as if nothing had changed. "It's been a long time. I hope this isn't about what happened before. We both know how those things go." I didn't respond immediately. I let his words hang in the air, watching him, studying the way he held himself. He didn't look guilty. He looked like the man who had always been in control, the man who thought he could charm his way out of anything. I gestured to the chair across from me, my voice steady. "Sit down, Robert." He hesitated, but only for a moment. He took the seat, settling in comfortably, still trying to read me, to gauge how far he could push. The room was silent for a few seconds, just the hum of the air conditioning and the faint rustle of paper as I adjusted the file on the table between us. "This isn't about the past, Robert," I said quietly, my voice calm, almost distant. "This is about the truth, about what you've done, what you've stolen from me." His expression flickered for a brief second, but he recovered quickly. "Alice, I really don't know what you're talking about. We've been over this. Whatever happened, it's in the past. There's no need to drag it up again." I took a deep breath, leaning forward slightly, ensuring that my calmness was felt in every word. "No, Robert, you don't get to decide when it's over. I've spent years trying to bury what you did, trying to forget. But the truth is, I can't. And now, neither can you." I opened the file in front of me and slid it across the table. He glanced at it, but his gaze quickly turned back to me, unfazed. I could see his mind working, calculating, trying to figure out how much danger he was in. "These are just papers, Alice. What's your point?" he said, his voice tinged with impatience. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I stood up and walked around the table, each step deliberate, controlled. I leaned down, placing the documents in front of him. "This is your manipulation," I said, my voice low and measured. "These are the financial records that tie you to every lie you told, every promise you made that was nothing more than a means to control me. This is how you kept me trapped in your web." Robert's eyes narrowed as he glanced down at the papers, his usual confidence starting to falter. But he quickly regained his composure. "You can't prove any of this. It's just paper. It's nothing." I smiled coldly, walking back to my seat. "It's not just paper, Robert. It's a map of your lies. A map that shows exactly how you manipulated me, how you used money to control me, to make sure I stayed under your thumb. It's all here, the transactions, the messages, everything you thought was hidden. And it's going to come out." His jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. It was only a brief moment, but it was enough. I had him, and I knew it. "I've already spoken to people, Robert," I continued, my voice unwavering. "People who saw what you did, people who can testify to your behavior. It's not just about me anymore. It's about everyone you've hurt. I'm going to make sure the world knows who you really are." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his calm facade cracking. "You think you can ruin me, Alice? You don't know what you're getting into. People will take your side now, but they'll forget. They'll move on, and you'll be left alone." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "No, Robert, you'll be left alone. And this time, I won't be the one who's forgotten." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The tension in the room was palpable, a heavy silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Robert's eyes darted to the papers on the table, then back to me, and I could see the gears turning in his mind. He was calculating his next move, trying to figure out how to twist this situation in his favor. But he didn't have time. I had already won. "I'm not interested in revenge," I said finally, my voice calm. "I'm interested in justice. And this is what justice looks like." Robert's face twisted, and for the first time, I saw something raw in his eyes, fear, desperation. He knew I was right. He knew I had won. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert sat there, unable to speak, his mind racing as he realized the gravity of what had just happened. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it. "You'll regret this," he muttered under his breath, his voice low, but it didn't have the same conviction it once did. The power he had wielded over me for so long was slipping away, and he could do nothing to stop it. I stood up, straightening my jacket. "No, Robert, you will." The weeks following my confrontation with Robert felt like a blur. The truth had been laid bare, and the repercussions of that truth rippled through my life. The legal proceedings moved swiftly, the evidence I had gathered leaving no room for doubt. Robert fought it, of course. He tried to use every trick in the book to discredit me, to undermine the case. But it wasn't enough. His power, the power he had wielded over me and so many others, crumbled under the weight of the facts. The trial wasn't sensationalized. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no public spectacle. It was clean, clinical, just as I had intended. The truth spoke for itself, and that was all that mattered. There were no moments of vindictive triumph, no moments of gloating. It was about justice, not revenge. I remember sitting in that courtroom, hearing the final verdict, and feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. Robert was found guilty. The financial restitution came, as did the formal recognition of the manipulation and abuse he had carried out for years. But it wasn't the money, or even the legal victory, that mattered to me. It was the acknowledgement of what had been done, the truth that had been buried for so long, finally brought into the light. In the weeks that followed, as Robert faced the consequences of his actions, I allowed myself to take a deep breath. The weight that had pressed on me for years, the constant burden of shame and guilt, began to lift. I wasn't free yet, but I was on the way, and that was enough for now. I didn't rush into a new chapter of my life. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to simply be. I took time off from work, from the constant drive that had fueled me for so long. I spent time with friends, people who had always supported me, and I reconnected with parts of myself that had been buried under the layers of responsibility I had taken on over the years. I started to write again, not legal briefs or case reports, but my own thoughts, my own reflections. It felt good to express myself without the constraints of the world around me. One of the most important changes was my decision to share my story. I didn't do it for attention or sympathy. I did it because I knew I could help others who had been through similar experiences. I wrote a piece for a legal journal, one that discussed the psychological manipulation and financial abuse that often go unnoticed in families. It wasn't an easy thing to do, to expose my own pain, but I knew it was necessary. The response was overwhelming. Women reached out to me from across the country, sharing their own stories of abuse, of manipulation, of being silenced. It was humbling to know that my story had resonated with them, that by speaking out, I had given them the courage to do the same. In a small way, I was helping them reclaim their voices, just as I had reclaimed mine. As the months passed, I found myself moving in a new direction. My work became more focused on advocacy, on helping others who had been caught in the same traps I had once been in. I started volunteering at a legal aid clinic that specialized in helping victims of financial abuse and manipulation. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was meaningful. It was something I could do, something that gave my work a new sense of purpose. And then, there were the quiet moments. The moments when I allowed myself to look back, to reflect on how far I had come. The woman who had once been trapped in a web of lies, of shame and confusion, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced the darkness and come out the other side. A woman who had learned that her strength wasn't in her ability to endure, but in her ability to act, to fight for what was rightfully hers. I thought often about Robert, about the man who had once been a part of my life in a way I could never truly understand. There was no satisfaction in his downfall, no joy in seeing him punished. It was justice, not revenge, that mattered. And now, I could walk through the world knowing that I had done what was necessary, not just for me, but for everyone he had hurt. I didn't need closure, not in the way I had once thought. What I needed was freedom, and I had found it. The sun was setting one evening, casting a golden glow over the horizon, when I found myself standing in front of my apartment window. The city stretched out before me, the lights flickering on as the night began to fall. I had no grand vision of what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer defined by the past. I was no longer bound by the choices I had once made in a moment of weakness. I had rebuilt myself, step by step, through the strength of my own will and the support of those who cared about me. And as the night settled in around me, I felt the weight of everything I had endured settle into its rightful place, not as a burden, but as a part of me, a part of my story that had shaped me into who I was now. I was free,